Welcome to a special edition of the BioCentury This Week podcast. I'm Jeff Cranmer, one of the executive editors here at BioCentury, and today we are turning our focus to BioCentury's newest conference, BioCentury Grand Rounds. The meeting, which is our fourth meeting that we hold each year, kicks off September 9th in Nashville, and it runs through September 11th. Now, Nashville needs no introduction, and I'm pretty sure my guests don't really need one either, but here goes. Joining me to help set the stage for the event are Guang. He's a PhD and partner at McKinsey and Company. Paul Peter Tack, also a PhD and an MD. He's president and CEO of Candel Therapeutics. And Abby Trotter. She is executive director of Life Science Tennessee. Now, from the BioCentury side, we're joined by BioCentury's co-founder and CEO David Flores, and of course, listeners to our podcast know, editor-in-chief and chief tennis correspondent Simone Fishburne. Now, BioCentury Grand Rounds is BioCentury's first R&D meeting. It takes on the hurdles in the translation of science into new medicines. And I'll just put this out there, full disclosure, we're having this in Nashville in the great state of Tennessee. My wife is from Chattanooga, so I'm a little bit biased when it comes to Tennessee. I just want to get the conflict of interest out there. And I don't even want to get started on barbecue because I know Guang is from North Carolina, and he's going to try to argue something about low country food and the barbecue there being better than Tennessee. Not the case. All right. Now, Simone, I'm going to bring you in. You've been working tirelessly to recruit panelists, to develop the themes of the conference, all sorts of, you've been working with me to pick presenting companies who are very early stage. Set the stage for us here, Simone. I know we have four big themes of the conference, so let me turn it over to you for a little bit.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, you brought up the PhD issue, so I'm going to lean into that because I and several of my team actually have leaned in, many of them, and I have PhDs as well. This is a science conference. This is a conference that is going to talk about translational science, translational issues, and I raise that because, as Dave may talk about at the end, BioCentury's long been doing conferences. Most of those have been business focused, and we sometimes have some R&D panels. But what we really wanted to do with this conference is something slightly different, and we're really going to geek out, okay? So that's what I want people to know about. This is our geeky conference, okay? Bring your best, okay? And so we are really leaning into the academia industry interface, the area where science starts and gets translated or converted into industry programs and or companies. And we also know that that is the area probably of the biggest number of failures, sort of behind the big failure rate in science. I think our McKinsey friends will talk a little bit about their report on that later. What we're doing with this conference is we are creating a forum to bring together leading academics and emerging leaders with investors, farmers, people looking for early stage innovation, and major thought leaders, one of whom in Paul Peter we have on this call, and we also have Abby on the call representing the local Nashville ecosystem, because what we have, it's really generating a lot of excitement. We have this phenomenal steering committee. We have panelists with a lot of very big names. We have some real Nashville heavy hitters on our panels, really a fair number. And importantly, we have emerging talent. So we have a number of first-time CEOs who've spun their companies out of academia and are sitting really in the science of what they're doing.
Simone, stop teasing us. Who are some of these people? I know Paul Peter will be there, and of course Abby and Guang, but who else is going to be either moderating, or I know you have a really great kickoff fireside chat with two leading women in R&D. Why don't we start there?
All right, so I'll give you some of the highlights, but then I'm going to get into trouble for all the great people that I don't get to mention. So I will send everybody to our website. So what I'm going to do is highlight 3 special sessions. I have the honor to kick off this conference with a fireside chat with Fiona Marshall, who is the head of research at Novartis, and Jane Grogan, who is the head of research at Biogen. Anybody who knows me knows how delighted I'm going to be able to put up 2 phenomenal women that didn't used to be heads of research who were women not so long ago, but that's actually not what we're going to discuss. We're really going to get into some of the issues that actually are going to come up during the conference. I won't get into the science of it right now, and then how they think about those at their pharmas, causal biology, new modalities, how to think about getting drugs to and new modality drugs to the right place in the body, some of those issues. Couple of other really big names, Jeff. Greg Verdeen, Harvard professor and serial entrepreneur, is giving a keynote speech on blowing up the small molecule paradigm. And we have a lunchtime fireside chat with Lou Borio and Robert Carnahan from Vanderbilt, where, a big infectious disease expert, 2 infectious disease experts talking about that area.
And Lou, of course, she's now at Arch Venture Partners. She was working in DC for a long time. She is a longtime source for BioCentury and is just fabulous, as are all the other folks that you mentioned.
I actually just discovered she lives very close to me here in DC. So,
oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to bring in Abby now. Oh, Dave, you want to jump in?
Sure. I just, while we're on the program and who's gotten involved, I think it's really important to point out that there's a really strong set of global VCs who are part of the founding steering committee in providing their input on what they are looking for in terms of what kinds of innovation they want to see, what kinds of problems that they're concerned about, having addressed in the translational area. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that this is not only the academic translational interface, it includes the people who are thinking about how to finance it.
And thanks for bringing that up, Dave, because when we first piloted this idea, we have a bunch of founding investors on our steering committee. And as you point out, they're not only thinking about what they want to invest, but they are deep in the weeds of the science themselves too. And so they are actually, some of them moderating and some of them on the panels. And they're going to be meeting with what Jeff's going to talk about, presenting companies and so on as well. So that's a really good point.
Well, bear with me for just a second, and then I want to get to Abby here. 14 and counting founding investors: 5 a.m., Arch, Deerfield, F2, IASO, Lightspeed, MPM, Opus, Playground, Sofinova Partners, SV, Syncona, Third Rock, and Chris Garabedian's Zontogeny. That's a perceptive related firm. It's a great group, and they're going to bring a lot to the table in the panels, but they also, I think many of them like a cocktail, and they'll be great to chat with in the hallway as well. I'd like to bring in Abby now from the great state of Tennessee to tell us about the biotech ecosystem there. Usually you think biotech, you think San Diego, Boston, the Bay Area. Abby, why does Nashville make sense as the location for this year's conference? And what is happening in Tennessee as far as biotech goes?
Well, thanks, Jeff, so much for having me on the program today. And we are very excited about this, what I'm going to call emerging event opportunity for BioCentury. And they picked a great city to host the first one because we're a great emerging city for the biotech space right here in Nashville. And, we have over 44,000 jobs in the biotech space across our state. But we've got some really interesting things going on in and around Nashville, too. Everyone knows that Vanderbilt University is a top NIH research institution. So perfectly fitting that we're going to be talking about R&D and translational medicine right here in a great city for it. And even our state of Tennessee has gotten increasingly focused on commercialization and R&D opportunities. The state of Tennessee just this past year put up $10 million in SBIR matching funds in the state just to help companies that are inside the state of Tennessee that are doing some of that translational research and commercializing out of our research institutions. And you mentioned, some fabulous VCs. We're extremely excited to host them here in Nashville. And the state of Tennessee just last year, through one of Life Science Tennessee partner groups called Launch Tennessee, just started our own, we'll call it venture capital fund. It's a $70 million fund to invest in tech-based startups. And we're hoping to increase that fund over a number of years. That those are funds that are available specifically, for early stage companies, and they have to be matched by other venture capital. So there's all kinds of great opportunities. So that's just Nashville. And, not to mention also, very close to the Nashville ecosystem or ecosystem, as you've been saying. I guess it's tomato, but there's just this small little cancer research hospital just a couple of hours down the road called St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital. Some may have heard about it. So incredible opportunities coming out of St. Jude as well, as they're beginning to really focus on commercialization opportunities and startups. They've just hired a great director of innovation, Lisa Jordan, out of Utah. So we're very excited about the opportunities that we're going to see out of St. Jude. And then, of course, to the east, actually where I am today, just about 10 miles from Oak Ridge National Laboratory, some incredible research going on there, too, in one of the largest supercomputers in the world. So I could go on and on, Jeff, but maybe we stop there.
That's a great...
Abby, I just want to jump in because, one of the draws for Tennessee, of course, was this tremendous amount of research. And we will, in fact, be having posters presented at the conference from some of these institutions that you've talked about. A lot of really interesting labs are submitting posters. So as I pointed out, this is a science and translational meeting where you can get things done, but you can come and find some of those opportunities with those posters.
Terrific. And I didn't even mention Meharry Medical College, just announced today that Bloomberg gave a $175 million grant to its endowment for equity-based research. And just last year, they announced the Diaspora Genomic Research Institution, which is a partner with pharma as well. So terrific opportunities right here.
Excellent. Now, I want to bring Dave back in. Dave, rather famously, at least for those of us in the Bay Area, longtime Sharks fan. He decided to move to Tennessee. He gave up on any chance of the Sharks winning the Cup and really wanted to go with the winner like the Predators. But Dave, there's probably more behind the Nashville story. I know BioEquity last year was in Dublin, which is sort of a burgeoning biotech ecosystem. Singapore for our East-West conference last year. And this year, another up-and-coming biotech ecosystem. You were behind the selection of Nashville, which is a little surprising because I know you like to get out and travel, and you're choosing a town that you live in. Why Nashville?
Oh, I have to do full disclosure. I woke up one day and you and Simone told me you guys picked Nashville. So I love the fact that we're coming here, and I love the fact that there's so much to display here. But let me go back a little bit to all of this, where we put our meetings and why we do our meetings. Everybody at BioCentury, we've been for 30 years. There's just hordes of us like traveling. And we know so many smart and talented people who are trying to turn science into medicine. And almost without exception, everywhere we go, everyone wants to create their own hubs. And one of the things we've developed over that time is we've created a first principle, which is as we've gone to places, they want to be really good in whatever country they're in or something like that. And our first principle is really, it's not good enough to be the best in Boston or the best in San Diego or the best in the UK or Copenhagen or Shanghai. It's everyone's goal is to be best in the world. And that requires, we think, cross-border collaboration and cooperation, again, without exception, between institutions, across state lines, across national boundaries. All of this requires building relationships and networks. So one of BioCentury's missions is to help innovators and investors build those networks. So Grand Rounds, as Simone and everyone else pointed out, it's our latest effort in, it's an R&D meeting, but it's also our latest effort to build a new network in terms of like linking academic discovery with translational skills. And as we mentioned before, the investors who finance it all. So the other thing that's really important to recognize is everyone in this industry talks about meeting unmet patient needs. Grand Rounds actually addresses something else, which is our whole industry has its own unmet needs. It's the roadblocks that slow the translation of innovation into new medicines. And that is what we're going to spend 2.5 days talking about, is how to work our way through those roadblocks and become more efficient and effective using new science and new technologies and digital science and all these other things to still do the same thing, which is to deliver solutions to patients worldwide. So Nashville happens to be a place that it is a really profoundly complex area for healthcare services. It's got target discovery. There's huge amount of clinical research. There's hospital services. A vast amount of patient records are processed here. So it is sort of like this big ecosystem, and it's a great place to start a deep dive into translation.
Yeah, the word is out. I mean, Oracle is moving there. You think Nashville, you think country, but I'm a big alt-rock fan. Jack White of the White Stripes moved from Detroit to Nashville, so things are and Dave lives there now. Did I mention that? So
Basement East for alt-rock. We'll see you there, Jeff.
All right. And you mentioned innovators. We happen to have one here on this call, Paul Peter Tak. He was at GSK for a long time, where he served as SVP and Chief Immunology Officer and Global Development Leader for about 7 years back in the teens. And he was at Flagship. Do I have that right, Paul Peter?
Yeah, that's correct.
And what can we say? I mean, you've been leading Candel Therapeutics since September 2020. You helped take them public on NASDAQ about 3 years ago, before things started getting a little bit weird with this bear market. You are joining us. Thank you very much. And you will be moderating a panel in the super hot area of I&I. Can you tell us a bit about what your panel will be focused on?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thanks for having me. It's actually fantastic to support this meeting. I've been involved in multiple BioCentury meetings, which were all great and focused on the business. But ultimately, if you want to become more successful in the business, you need to understand drug discovery and development in this business. So it's fantastic to have this beautiful program that is, I think, really asking the question, how can we become more successful in getting medicines for patients that will transform their lives potentially while creating value for investors and all other stakeholders. And if you think about this systematically, and a more negative way would be, how can you reduce attrition? But it's really about how do you increase the probability of success that you get there. Then the big chapters are covered by the program of the Grand Rounds, including how do you select the best therapeutic targets, including focusing as much as possible on human biology. Well, we know that animal models that have their place have been hugely misleading in many ways in terms of the predicted value. How do you, when you focus on human biology, analyze the data in a systematic way using computational biology, artificial intelligence approaches, and be really systematic in defining your targets? Then if you have defined your targets, it's about what kind of modality are we going to use. I'm completely open-minded about modalities, because you may want to use different modalities for different purposes. So we'll talk about CAR T cells, new antibodies with dual mechanisms, viral immunotherapies, including viral approaches to express antibodies, what have you, right? It's this whole new world emerging where you want to try to focus on the quality of the molecule, but where there's also quite a lot of innovation in terms of different modalities that you may use, and even in sequential combination therapies.
Paul Peter, let me just underscore that one of the reasons why I think I&I is just so exciting right now. I mean, obviously, we've had years of the same targets and new molecules. We've got new ones coming up. But one of the reasons it's so exciting is this growing understanding that so many diseases, I'm not going to say all, but so many diseases really have an immune or inflammatory component. And so the progress that's made there is like spilling into all of these other therapeutic areas. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I can't agree more. So I'm currently leading a company that's, as you have mentioned, called Candel Therapeutics, where we develop immunotherapies for very difficult to treat solid tumors. But I'm a rheumatologist. I've had a long academic career as a professor of clinical immunology and rheumatology before I even moved to GSK. And most of my life, I've tried to suppress actually the immune system to better the life of patients with immune-mediated inflammatory diseases, how we like to group them, because they have overlapping molecular and immunological mechanisms. And progress in medicine is a discontinuous process. So when I, as a young PhD student and internist in training to become a rheumatologist, got involved in this field, many people were in wheelchairs with rheumatoid arthritis, and we had very limited therapeutic options. And I've been a witness and participant, active participant in the development of the biologics at the time in the late 90s, right? And there was like a revolution. And then for a long time, there was basically incremental improvement. But now we see the next big revolution, I think triggered by, for example, the use of CAR T cells. We know that it's great to suppress inflammation so that patients can feel better, have better outcomes in terms of disability, reduced chance of developing cardiovascular disease, etc. But ultimately, you want to induce disease remission, in other words, absence of any signs and symptoms. But from an immunological perspective, I would say absence of inflammation. And ideally, you would do that, well, you don't need any treatments anymore. So that would be cure. We can start to think about cure based on the latest developments. But immunology is, and this is my biased view, but there's data to support this view, I think. Immunology is probably the most successful discovery platform at this time, which is relevant for immuno-oncology, for immune-mediated inflammatory diseases, for infectious diseases, for vaccines, for neuroimmunology, what have you. So this is a major platform. We are seeing success for decades, I think, and this is not over yet. And I'm very pleased, actually, that I'm going to chair a forum, a discussion about immune-mediated inflammatory diseases. What's next, so I can wear my old hat of the rheumatologist again, while I do in my daily life reverse rheumatology, which I call oncology. Right? But it's the same. You try to use the same biology to basically address different scientific and medical problems. So I'm quite excited that we're going to do that. I guess we're going to talk about CAR T cells, about new antibodies. We should not forget that there's also development in the field of small molecules. We will talk probably about targeting the different disease mechanisms that are operative during different stages of the disease. I think we need to pay more attention to this. What you need in late stage disease is quite different from what you may try to attempt in early disease when there's a so-called therapeutic window of opportunity. And we can start to think about prevention of the disease, prevention of immune-mediated inflammatory diseases. My lab in the past in Amsterdam pioneered this with a highly innovative proof of mechanism trial where we selected healthy individuals who never had arthritis, but who were at risk of developing rheumatoid arthritis. Based on all kinds of factors, we can define a population that's very likely to develop autoimmune disease. And we gave them in a randomized trial rituximab or placebo. And we could show that with a single infusion of rituximab, we could delay the onset of RA by 1 year. Actually, that's a very cost-effective approach. But it's a very, very rude and crude approach. In my paper that we published in 2016, we predicted that the next step would be to use CAR T cells to do exactly this. So we're starting to see how all of this comes to fruition. So I'm quite excited that we can see the overlap between different fields from oncology to immunoinflammation. I'm also quite excited to go for the first time in my life to Nashville and hear all these exciting stories in this in this podcast. And I've never been to Nashville. I associate it primarily with music, great music. So that's important. But now I hear that's also a fantastic ecosystem developing. And I'm very much looking forward to the engagement with the audience, with other participants, and with all of you. I think it's a great program.
Well, I don't know if you like whiskey, but if you do, the Tennessee whiskey will make you forget that Scotch ever existed.
I'm going to add this to my list.
I can say that because I never get invited to our European conferences, so.
Okay, we can talk about this later.
I think we have to do one in Scotland.
Excellent. Guang has been waiting patiently in Raleigh, and I just want to say we could not put on these conferences without McKinsey. We have been partnered with McKinsey in our Shanghai conference, which is coming up in November, in our East-West conference, which is in Singapore, that's coming up in the spring. Our bioequity, we're having our 25th bioequity in Belgium next spring, and McKinsey always puts out one or two killer reports that just paint the story of what is happening in whatever topic area our meeting is focused on. So Guang, you have been working hard on a report for the Grand Rounds conference. Tell us a bit about it.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, McKinsey has been a knowledge partner across many conferences with BioCentury. And we're really excited about the first geeky conference for R&D. And like other reports, this one we promise will be packed with analysis and insights. And a primary focus would be thinking about how to translate from lab discoveries to patient impacts. To start out, we want to paint a big picture of why we're really excited about the next decade of translating from lab discovery to patient impacts. As you all know, we have more funding, scientific articles than ever. So all of those serve as substrates. But what can we do to translate these substrates into actual human treatments that are transformational? So we have more tools than ever to interrogate biology. And there's an exponential increase in computational power, as well as more modalities than ever to choose from. All of these are the tailwinds. However, we see some headwinds as well. The industry translation has been productive, but at times there have been some inefficiencies or bottlenecks, as Simone has mentioned. So in this report, we will ask a series of questions, including the increased amount of funding. Are they going to the right areas? Are they going to disease areas with the most substantial unmet needs? The scientists that are working on this translational research, are they focused on the most translatable experiments? And then finally, we will also have a deep dive on the geography in terms of whether these high impact scientific discoveries are translated in an equal way. We will be looking at Nashville, Tennessee, but many other academic powerhouse clusters, such as Raleigh-Durham, where I live, and other international hubs, asking the question of whether these high-impact scientific discoveries are equally translated into biotechs and human therapeutics when they originate from these clusters. It will be very exciting to dive into some of the barriers, but also what can we do to turn these around. And Paul Peter has mentioned back in 2016, folks already predicted CAR T could be used for autoimmune. And 8 years later in 2024, it's finally taking off. How can we shorten that time window? How can we do more of what CRISPR has done, which took 4 years from first discovery in the labs into being tested in humans? So that would be the vision and the report. And finally, I will save this for the presentation, but we will tee up some exciting potential models and solutions at which we can raise the tide, accelerate innovation and translation, and unlock the next wave of breakthrough therapeutics for human patients.
Guang, let me ask you a question. And by the way, it's not going to be the question that everybody else asks, which is, when is your report coming out, right? This is the number one question we get after all our meetings, like, when can I get my hands on the report? I'll ask you that afterwards. But one of the very sort of theses of having this conference and not having it in Boston or San Francisco or something is the large amount of really, really strong academic science done outside of those major hubs. And yet we hear from VCs that they want to find things in other places. And we hear from academics in other places that they don't have VCs walking the hallways there. So I think that you talked about that being part of what you're looking at. Do you see outside, that's one of the reasons we're doing the conference, to bring these people together. But do you see other changing trends that are democratizing or making the amount of research going on in those places more accessible, not just translatable, but accessible to the sort of funding that is required?
Yeah, absolutely. And Simone, as you mentioned, some of these research powerhouse clusters that I mentioned, such as Nashville, Tennessee, Raleigh-Durham, and Los Angeles, San Diego, and a little bit around the Maryland area, they have more NIH funding, perhaps even than Boston and the Bay Area. However, the translation ratio from science into biotechs is much, much lower. And what we found is oftentimes the science do get translated, but many, many times when they do, they actually originate in a hub that's outside of the origination clusters. For example, a lot of the science from Nashville, Tennessee, when a company gets founded, they actually get founded in Boston. So we are exploring also, what's the missing link? Is it the VC funding? Is it the presence of pharmaceutical headquarters and research hubs in these locations? And all of these will play a role. And as you mentioned, we are seeing some increasing local VC presence in these underpenetrated research hubs, both local VCs, but also global VCs establishing local presence. And I think that would surely also unlock some of the access as well as translation.
Okay, wow. Well, you guys definitely dropped a lot of science right there. And I'm very excited for our first Nerd Palooza, if we can call it that. Grand Rounds, September 9 through 11th, Nashville, Tennessee. There is still time to register at BioCenturyGrandRounds.com. And if you have registered already, good news, as you may know, the partnering system just opened on Monday, and you can start scheduling meetings now with investors, pharmas, biotechs, academics. And I'd just like to thank our sponsors and the founding investors. I mentioned them earlier. As far as sponsors, there are far too many to name on this podcast, but you can check them out on our website, BioCenturyGrandRounds.com. And special thanks to Abby joining us from Tennessee, Guang joining us from N.C. and Paul Peter Tak. I think you hide out in Massachusetts or something like that when you're not in the great Netherlands. Dave, as always, Simone, as always, really looking forward to this conference, and hopefully we'll see you there. Thank you. Kendall Square Orchestra provides the music for BioCentury this week. The group connects science and technology professionals and other members of the greater Boston community to collaborate, innovate, and inspire through music while supporting causes related to healthcare and education.